Millionaire arrives unannounced. Shocked by servants' actions with his mother, no one had told Adekunle Bakare that his mother laughed again, and it was a 6-year-old housekeeper who achieved it when he had already lost all hope. The private jet touched down on the runway of Murtala Muhammed International Airport in Lagos at 11:43 a.m., 20 minutes ahead of schedule. Adekunle Bakare, CEO of Bakare Group and one of Nigeria's most powerful figures in the real estate sector, descended the aircraft steps with the same calculated coolness with which he signed multi-million-dollar contracts. He wore a perfectly pressed navy linen suit, despite the 9-hour flight from London. Italian leather Oxford shoes gleaming under the September sun, and a tense jawline that his assistants knew very well was not a good sign. Segun, his chauffeur of 12 years, waited beside the black Range Rover with tinted windows. He didn't need to ask anything. He opened the rear door in silence, took the briefcase from the flight attendant, and settled behind the wheel before Aid finished buttoning his jacket. "To the house," Ade said without looking at him. "Yes, sir." It wasn't the original plan. The original plan was to go directly to the corporate offices in Victoria Island, review the bi-weekly reports with the financial team, and take a quick shower in the penthouse before dinner with Japanese investors. But something had changed in the last 48 hours. A call from his mother's doctor, Dr. Emeka Eze, which Aid listened to in the hermetic silence of his suite in Bora Aulak, had stirred something he preferred to keep still. Buried under layers of work and geographical distance. "Chief Bakare, your mother has refused food again. It's been 3 days. It's not clinically urgent, but I strongly recommend you come soon. Sometimes patients with her condition respond to stimuli that medicine cannot replicate." Ade had hung up without responding. Then he had asked his assistant to bring his flight forward. The Ikoyi district appeared behind the tinted windows with its usual arrogant elegance. Flamboyant trees, high walls, discreet security cameras, gardens perfectly manicured by hands that never inhabited those houses. The Bakare mansion was at the end of a private cul-de-sac, protected by 2 meters of dark concrete and a wrought iron gate that Ade remembered hating as a child because it took too long to open when he arrived from school. Today, it also took a while. The security guard, a new man Aid didn't recognize, took a second too long to identify him through the monitor before activating the mechanism. Aid mentally noted it. He would speak with the head of security. The Range Rover crossed the circular driveway of polished granite and stopped in front of the main entrance. Ade stepped out before Segun could turn off the engine. The mansion's facade greeted him as always, imposing colonial, with its imported marble columns and arched windows, which his paternal grandmother had commissioned from Italy 40 years ago. It was a beautiful house. Ade had never felt it as a home. He took out his phone to check messages as he walked to the main door. He had 17 unread emails, 2 missed calls from Kemi, his girlfriend, and a notification from the Frankfurt stock market. Nothing that couldn't wait 10 minutes. He pushed the carved wooden door and then stopped. The sound came before the image. Soft music, almost childlike, emanated from the main corridor. A song Ade took 3 seconds to identify because he hadn't heard it in over 40 years. "Sweet Mother," hummed by a young female voice, slightly off-key but filled with such genuine joy that it was impossible to ignore. It came from the main living room, at the end of the white marble corridor and crystal chandeliers that traversed the mansion's ground floor. Ade didn't move immediately. In 8 months of absence, 6 international trips, 4 countries, meetings that amounted to more hours than any normal person's sleep. No one had informed him of music in that house. The Bakare mansion, since his mother suffered a stroke 18 months ago, had adopted silence as its official language. An ordered, clinical silence, filled with the discreet steps of medical staff and the permanent hum of the ventilation system. Dr. Emeka Eze had recommended calm environments. "Chief, Mrs. Olufunke." No, that wasn't the nurse. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, his mother, had stopped speaking in the last 6 months, according to the weekly reports Ade received by email and read between meetings. And yet, music. He walked down the corridor. His rubber soles made no noise on the marble, the only aesthetic concession he allowed in his suits, and that gave him an advantage he hadn't sought. He advanced unannounced, with no one turning to receive him, without the usual welcome protocol that Mr. Obinna, the butler, executed with military precision every time the master of the house crossed that threshold. The main living room door was ajar. Ade pushed it slowly. What he saw on the other side stopped him with silent violence, as if the marble floor had suddenly turned into fresh cement. His mother was there. "Chief, Mrs. Olufunke Bakare," widow of Chief Femi Bakare, 81 years old, a woman who had presided over ambassadorial dinners and raised funds for 3 public hospitals before a clot in her left parietal lobe stole her speech and mobility on the right side of her body. That woman Ade had seen confined, silent, eyes fixed on an indefinite point for the last 18 months, was seated in her wheelchair in the center of the room, her left arm raised in the air, moving to the rhythm of the music, with a smile so enormous and so real that Ade had to clench his jaw to keep from making a sound. And in front of her, holding her hands with the naturalness of someone who had done it hundreds of times, a young woman danced, 26, maybe 27 years old, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, white apron over a gray uniform. Her dress twirled slightly as she took a sidestep, following the rhythm of the song she herself hummed. And Olufunke, his mother, who hadn't articulated a single coherent syllable in months, let out a sound, a chuckle, small, very brief, rough from disuse, but unmistakable. Adekunle Bakare, who had negotiated in front of ministers and had buried his father without shedding a single public tear, felt something move in his chest with the abruptness of glass cracking. He raised a hand to his mouth. The young woman hadn't seen him yet. She continued dancing, focused on Olufunke, attentive to every micro-expression of the elderly woman, with a devotion that no doctor, no therapist, no paid nurse had shown in the last year and a half. She hummed, I, sweet mother. I will never forget you, with such honest off-key singing that it was warmer than any perfect voice. And Olufunke raised her left arm, the only one that obeyed, with a joy Ade couldn't remember seeing in her since before the stroke, even from many years prior. It was Mr. Obina, the butler, who gave him away. The man appeared silently from the side hallway, saw Ade standing in the living room doorway, and opened his mouth to greet him with his usual protocol. Ade made a quick sign, hand extended, palm down, the universal gesture for don't say anything, but it was a second too late. Mr. Obina had already said in a low but audible voice, Chief Bakare, we weren't expecting you until. The young woman turned. Her dark brown eyes, large, framed by straight eyebrows that no one had overplucked, met Ade's with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. It wasn't fear exactly, nor was it the automatic subservience that domestic staff usually adopted when the master appeared unannounced. It was something closer to the calm of someone who knows they have done nothing wrong, mixed with the caution of someone who perfectly understands that this doesn't always matter. She gently released Olufunke's hands, not abruptly, but carefully, like someone putting down a sleeping child without waking them. Olufunke turned her wheelchair with the left lever. She did it herself. Another detail no one had mentioned to Ade, and upon seeing her son, her expression changed. The smile didn't entirely disappear, but it transformed into something more complex, something between recognition and a question. Mama, Ade said. The word came out hoarser than he intended. Olufunke looked at him, opened her mouth. The muscles on the right side of her face responded partially, as always, but the left side moved with intention. She said nothing. Ade crossed the room in 4 steps and knelt in front of the wheelchair. He took his mother's left hand in his, that small, time-stained hand that had once taught him to write his name in a squared notebook, and squeezed it harder than he intended. Olufunke squeezed back. Ade remained kneeling for a moment he couldn't measure. Then he stood up, adjusted his jacket, and turned to the young woman in the white apron who stood by the window, hands clasped in front, back straight. Who are you? Ade asked. His voice had already regained its usual temperature. Cold, precise, the voice of corporate meetings. The young woman didn't blink. Ifeoma Okoro, she said. I am the morning shift domestic staff. I arrived 3 weeks ago, sir. No one informed me of new staff. With all due respect, sir, that is a question for Mr. Obina or whoever manages the contracts. I just work here. Mr. Obina, from the doorway, cleared his throat slightly. Chief Bakare, the agency sent Miss Okoro as a replacement for Chidinma who had to. We'll talk later. Ade cut him off without looking at him. His eyes remained on Ifeoma. What were you doing? Dancing, she said without irony, without apology, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. My mother doesn't dance. Your mother was dancing perfectly well 15 minutes ago, sir. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Ade counted them involuntarily. From her wheelchair, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke Bakare let out a soft sound. It wasn't a word, but it had the unmistakable cadence of someone agreeing with what had just been said. Ade looked at his mother, then looked at the young woman, and for the first time in many years, Adekunle Bakare didn't know exactly what to say. The afternoon settled over the mansion with the golden slowness of September in Lagos. Ade spent the first 2 hours in his second-floor study, reviewing overdue reports with half his usual attention. The other half remained, unbidden, with the image of his mother, raising her arm to the rhythm of Sweet Mother. At 4 p.m., he went down to meet Dr. Emeka Eze, who arrived punctually for his weekly visit with his black briefcase and round-rimmed glasses. "Tell me about the girl," Ade said as soon as the doctor crossed the library threshold. Dr. Emeka Eze raised his eyebrows with an expression that was half surprise, half professional satisfaction. "You saw her. I saw her dance with my mother. My mother, who according to your reports hadn't responded to stimuli since July." "Exactly," the doctor said without the slightest trace of discomfort. "Ifeoma arrived 21 days ago. In the first 3, Mrs. Olufunke didn't even look at her. On the 4th day, the girl came in humming while arranging the pillows, and your mother turned her head. It's not a cure, Chief Bakare, let's be clear. The neurological damage is permanent, but there is something about that girl that activates a response in Mrs. Olufunke that standard therapeutic stimuli haven't achieved." "What is it?" Dr. Emeka Eze took a moment. "Genuine presence," he finally said. "I don't know how to explain it in more clinical terms than that. The girl doesn't treat your mother like a patient. She treats her like a person. And there are brains that respond to that in ways neurology still doesn't fully understand." Ade processed that information with the same silence with which he processed difficult financial data, letting it sit, looking for the flaw, the trap, the angle he hadn't considered. Background, references. The agency checked her. She comes from Enugu State, no criminal record, 2 years of experience in elder care at a residence in Festac Town, a letter of recommendation from a family in Surulere where she worked for 14 months. Medical training, none, but she has something better for this specific case. "What?" The doctor again took his time as if choosing words with tweezers. "Infinite patience," he said, "and a way of looking at people that makes them feel seen. I don't know where that comes from. Probably from a place that wasn't easy, but it works." Ade didn't respond. That night, from his second-floor bedroom window, he saw Ifeoma cross the back garden towards the staff quarters. She walked quickly with a plastic bag hanging from her arm. She paused for a moment as she passed the mango tree in the center. She looked up at the sky. There was an almost full moon above the treetops, and she smiled alone to nowhere. Ade closed the curtain, but the image remained. Ifeoma Okoro had learned from a very young age that wealthy people have a particular way of looking at you. They see you completely, and don't see you at all at the same time. They see you like a well-placed piece of furniture. They notice if you're there or not, if you function or don't function, but they rarely stop to wonder what's behind the wood and varnish. Adekunle Bakare looked at her differently. That made her more uncomfortable than anything else. The morning after the master's return began like every morning since Ifeoma had arrived at the mansion. The alarm at 5:45. The cold shower because the staff quarters water heater took 20 minutes to warm up, and she didn't have 20 minutes. The uniform ironed the night before hung on the wooden chair, and the journey along the back corridor, the one the staff used, not the white marble one towards the industrial kitchen, where Mama Nike, the 6-2-year-old cook with pumice stone hands, and a mood as changeable as the August sky, already had the tea ready. "I know the chief has arrived," Mama Nike said without looking up from the eggs she was whisking in a clay bowl. "Yes," Ifeoma said. "Did he speak to you?" He asked who I was. Mama Nike let out a sound that could be a laugh or a grunt, depending on the angle, and I told him my name, and that if he wanted to know more, he should ask Mr. Obina. The clay bowl hit the granite counter with a louder sound than necessary. "My dear," Mama Nike said, now looking at her, "there is an order of things here. Chief Ade is not like his mother. With Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, one can be free. With him, you have to measure every word 3 times before saying it." "I noticed," Ifeoma said. She took her cup of tea, but I didn't say anything out of place. What you call in place and what he calls in place can be 2 different cities in 2 different countries. Ifeoma took a sip of tea and didn't respond, not because she had no answer, but because she had spent 26 years learning when to keep it. She had arrived at the Bakare mansion on a rainy Tuesday in August, with a navy canvas bag, a plastic folder with her documents and references, and the firm conviction that she would last exactly as long as she lasted, not a day more out of obligation, not one less out of fear. The agency had given her the assignment with a brief warning. "The madam is difficult. She doesn't speak. She doesn't respond." Previous staff didn't last long because they got nervous with the silence. Ifeoma had asked, "What does Madam need?" The woman from the agency had looked at her like someone looking at a person who doesn't understand the right question. Company, or so the doctors say, but she doesn't react. Ifeoma had put the folder in her canvas bag and gone. "Mr." Obina received her with a cold formality that wasn't ill will, but simply the armor developed by anyone who had worked too many years in a house where pain was not named. He showed her the staff quarters, clean, functional, a small window overlooking the mango tree, and explained the schedule with the economy of words of someone who had repeated it many times. Morning shift from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., 1-hour break at midday, Tuesdays and Thursdays, support with the evening shift if staff were absent. Then he took her to Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's room. The elderly woman was seated in her wheelchair by the window. She looked towards the garden, didn't turn when they entered. Mr. Obina said in that tone used with gravely ill patients or very young children, "Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, I brought Ifeoma. She will help you in the mornings, nothing." Mr. Obina gave Ifeoma a look that was almost an apology and left. Ifeoma stood in the center of the room for a moment. Then she pulled the wooden chair from beside the desk, placed it next to the wheelchair, not in front of it, but beside it, as if they were two people looking together at the same garden, and sat down. She said nothing. She didn't try to make eye contact, didn't fluff unnecessary pillows, didn't speak in that low-volume voice with softened consonants that people use with the elderly, as if they might break with normal sound. She simply sat and looked at the garden. They stayed like that for 20 minutes. Then Ifeoma said in a normal voice, "That mango tree is loaded. Someone will have to pick them before the fruit rots on the ground." "Chief, Mrs." Olufunke didn't respond, but Ifeoma noticed a millimeter of movement. The elderly woman had slightly turned her head, not towards her, but towards the mango tree. Ifeoma considered that a sufficient victory for the first day. The first 3 days were exactly as the agency had warned. Silence. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke ate what was put in front of her. Little, with difficulty, the right side of her mouth obeying partially, and looked out the window or at the ceiling with the expression of someone in a place to which you had no access. The other domestic staff passed through the corridor with that particular mix of pity and discomfort produced by others' suffering when you don't know what to do with it. Ifeoma felt no pity. She felt recognition. She had grown up in Umuaka, a village in Enugu State, with a grandmother who had been widowed young and had raised 4 children in a mud brick house with an earthen floor. When Ifeoma was 12, her grandmother suffered a stroke that paralyzed her right arm and almost completely erased her English. Only Igbo remained, which was her first language, the one she had learned as a child before school imposed English. The region's health system had given them 3 consultations and a list of medications they couldn't afford. Ifeoma had learned to read rehabilitation manuals downloaded from the municipal library using the public access computer, and had spent the next 2 years helping her grandmother regain movement with exercises she half-invented and adapted based on what she observed. Her grandmother never recovered English, but she laughed again, danced, cooked with her good arm, pointed at things with her finger, and gave entire explanations in Igbo that Ifeoma half understood, but always nodded to. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke reminded her of her grandmother, not in appearance. Her grandmother was dark-skinned and small and smelled of local spices, and Chief, Mrs. Olufunke was tall, even seated, with the hands of someone who had used expensive creams all her life, but in something more internal, in the way she looked at things she could no longer reach, in the quiet pride of someone who perfectly knows what she lacks and decides not to make a fuss about it. On the 4th day, Ifeoma arrived humming. It wasn't a plan. Simply that morning she had dreamed of her grandmother, and upon waking, a song her grandmother sang while grinding corn had come to mind. And when she entered Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's room, the humming continued on its own, like water that has found its course. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke turned her head towards her. Ifeoma kept humming, fluffed the pillows, opened the window a little, poured the glass of water with the bent straw that the doctor had indicated, and when she approached to push the chair to the bathroom for the morning routine, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke slowly, with effort, raised her left arm and placed it on the armrest of the chair, so it was directly in the path of Ifeoma's hand. It wasn't an embrace. It was barely a touch, but it was intentional. Ifeoma placed her hand over Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's for a moment, saying nothing, not making it a big medical or emotional event. Then they continued with the routine. In the next 17 days, Ifeoma discovered Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, with the same patience her grandmother had taught her to distinguish medicinal plants from the bush, unhurried, unforced, letting everything reveal itself in its own time. She discovered that Chief, Mrs. Olufunke liked music, not the classical music the previous staff had played on the stereo following doctor's instructions, but Nigerian music from her era, highlife, slow juju, songs by Chief, Stephen Osita, Osadebe, and Ebenezer Obey that Ifeoma didn't know but found on YouTube from her phone. She discovered that when Joromi by Victor Uwaifo played, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's fingers drummed softly on the armrest of the chair. She discovered that Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, had strong opinions about the garden. When Mr. Obina passed by the window with decisions she considered incorrect, pruning the rose bush in the wrong season, not watering the fern in the morning, the elderly woman made a deep sound, a single note that Ifeoma learned to interpret as disapproval. She began to relay these complaints to Mr. Obina with a diplomacy the butler reluctantly accepted because they came, after all, from the lady of the house. She discovered that Chief, Mrs. Olufunke slept better when someone was present in the room, even if there was no interaction. She couldn't explain it, she just noticed it. When Ifeoma stayed sewing in the corner during the afternoon nap, the elderly woman's breathing became deeper and more regular than when she slept alone. And she discovered, 10 days after her arrival, that Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, could dance. It was a completely honest accident. Ifeoma was tidying the downstairs living room for the therapist's visit, when her phone, connected to the stereo's Bluetooth which she had carelessly left there, started ringing on its own. It was Sweet Mother by Prince Nico Mbarga, a song she had on a playlist she used for cooking. Ifeoma went to turn it off, but Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, who was by the window, had already raised her left arm, not towards the stereo, but in the air, to the rhythm. Ifeoma stood still for a moment, then did the most natural thing in the world. She approached, took the elderly woman's hand, and began to move to the rhythm with her. It wasn't choreography, it was barely a sway. 2 side steps, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's arm up, Ifeoma supporting it, a small, almost symbolic turn, but Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's eyes were wide open, and she had an expression on her face that Ifeoma had never seen in any elderly person she had worked with. Pure and simple delight. Sweet Mother, I will never forget you, Ifeoma hummed, off-key and unashamed, and Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, 81 years old, stroke 18 months ago, without having articulated a single clear syllable since July, laughed. It was that moment that Adekunle Bakare found when he crossed the living room door on the day of his return. What Ifeoma didn't tell anyone, not Mama Nike, not Mr. Obina, not Dr. Emeka Eze when he interrogated her with his well-intentioned clinical questions, was that these moments with Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, cost her something, not in terms of effort, but in terms of memory. Every time the elderly woman looked at her with that mixture of gratitude and recognition that patients sometimes direct towards those who care for them, Ifeoma thought of her grandmother, of the way her grandmother had looked at her on the last afternoon, before Ifeoma took the bus to Lagos with her navy canvas bag and her references in the plastic folder. A look that said, I am letting you go even though I don't want to, and I do it because I know you need to leave, and I do it because I love you more than I love myself. Her grandmother was still alive, 73 years old, her right arm looser than before, but her left still firm enough to peel yams and to hug. She lived with Auntie Nkechi, the eldest of the 4 children, in the same mud brick house Ifeoma remembered from childhood, but which now had a cement floor thanks to a government program that had arrived 3 years late but had arrived. Ifeoma sent her money every 2 weeks, not much, what was left after rent, food on her day off, and the cheap soft drink she allowed herself as a luxury on Sundays. That was what no one in that mansion knew about her. What they did know, because it was impossible not to notice, was that Ifeoma did her job with an efficiency that admitted no complaints. She arrived punctually, left on time, didn't take more than her share in the kitchen, didn't use her phone during work hours except for Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's music, and showed the elderly woman a patience the rest of the staff observed with a mix of uncomfortable admiration and something akin to jealousy. That something akin to jealousy had a name, Sade. Sade Bello had been in the mansion for 4 years as head of the evening shift, 40 years old, brown-dyed hair, unquestionable efficiency, and the firm conviction that Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's care was her territory. She had established routines, learned the elderly woman's preferences, endured months of silence and rejection without deserting, and in 3 weeks, a girl from Enugu State, without any certified training, had achieved with Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, what she hadn't been able to in 4 years. Sade couldn't forgive her. She didn't say it directly, but there were small things. Ifeoma's spare uniform appearing on the wrong hook in the staff quarters. Medical instructions she forgot to relay when shifts changed. The casual comment in front of Mr. Obinna that some things seem nice at first, but later they are seen more clearly. Ifeoma registered everything. She didn't respond. She had learned very young that certain battles are won by remaining standing when the other expects you to fall. The afternoon of Ade's second day back, Mr. Obinna called her to the second-floor study. She went up the staff staircase. There were 2 in that mansion, the main marble one and the side wooden one, and she knocked on the slightly ajar door. "Come in," Ade's voice said. She entered. The study was enormous and orderly, with that precision of someone who tolerates no disorder but doesn't personally impose it. Someone else maintained it that way. Books in languages Ifeoma vaguely identified. English, something that might be German, perhaps Portuguese. A model of a glass building on a side table. 2 computer screens on with columns of numbers Ifeoma didn't try to read. Ade stood by the window with a cup of coffee in his hand. He looked at her when she entered with the same expression as the previous afternoon. Evaluating, direct, without the discomfort many wealthy people feel when they have to speak with domestic staff, which they compensate for with false cordiality or exaggerated coldness. Adekunle Bakare compensated for nothing. He simply looked. "Sit," he said, pointing to the chair in front of the desk. Ifeoma considered the invitation for a second. Domestic staff did not sit in the master's study. It wasn't a written rule. It was simply the social physics of such houses. She sat. "I want you to tell me how you work with my mother," Ade said. He settled into the armchair opposite her with the cup of coffee in his hand. "Dr. Emeka Eze gave me his version. I want yours." "There's not much to tell," Ifeoma said. "I keep her company. I listen to what she can say and what she can't say but communicates in other ways. I play music when she wants it. I give her the sunshine she needs. I talk about normal things." "What normal things?" "The garden, the weather, what there is to eat, the news if she asks, although she doesn't ask with words, but with her eyes when I turn on the radio. And I do the rehabilitation exercises with her, the ones the doctor indicated, plus the ones that seem reasonable to me depending on how she is that day." Ade frowned slightly. "Reasonable by your judgment?" "By the judgment of seeing how she is. If her arm is tired, I don't insist. If she's in a good mood and wants more, I continue." "Manuals are guides, sir. They are not Chief, Mrs. Olufunke." Silence. Ade twirled the coffee cup in his hands, a gesture Ifeoma correctly interpreted as the external equivalent of someone processing something they didn't expect to hear. "Do you have training in geriatric care?" he asked. 2 years in an elder care residence in Festac town and 14 months with a private family in Surulere. And before that, Ifeoma looked at him for a moment. "Before that, I cared for my grandmother," she said, "without pay and without a manual." Ade didn't respond immediately. Something crossed his expression that Ifeoma couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't tenderness exactly, nor pity, but something closer to the recognition of information that slightly changes the map of a situation. "You will stay," he finally said, as if deciding it at that moment, although Ifeoma suspected the decision had been made before she came upstairs. "Thank you, sir, but I want brief, daily reports. What you did with my mother, how she responded. If there was anything unusual, you can send them to Mr. Obinna, and he will forward them to me." "Agreed. And I want you to know something." Ifeoma waited. "What I saw yesterday," Ade said, and there was a change in his voice so small that perhaps only she noticed it. "It was important to me. I'm not given to saying such things, but I think it's right that you know." Ifeoma nodded. She said nothing because she had learned in 26 years of life, in places where there was always someone with more power than her, that the moments when powerful people showed humanity were precisely the moments to be most careful, not out of distrust, but because those moments were fragile, and fragile things in those houses tended to break faster than anywhere else. She left the study, went down the wooden staircase, crossed the back corridor, and arrived at Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's room just in time for the nap shift. The elderly woman was awake, looking at the mango tree in the garden. Seeing her enter, she raised her left arm. Ifeoma took that small hand in hers and stayed there in silence. While outside, the Lagos September did what September knows how to do. Rain without warning, stop without saying goodbye, and leave the air clean and heavy at the same time, as if the world had just decided something important and still didn't know if it was a good decision. Kemi Adeyemi arrived at the Bakare mansion on Friday afternoon, with the punctuality of someone who knows exactly when to make an entrance and enough luggage for 3 days. Although no one had asked her to stay, that's how it was. Kemi occupied spaces before anyone had finished deciding whether to offer them. Ade heard her arrive from his study, the unmistakable sound of her 4-inch heels on the main corridor's marble, the brief and somewhat condescending greeting with which she always treated Mr. Obinna, the jingle of her gold bracelets as she dropped her coat onto the entrance armchair, without looking if anyone picked it up. 4 years of relationship had taught Ade this vocabulary of noises. They hadn't yet taught him what to do with it. He went down to greet her. Kemi Adeyemi was 38 years old, had a career in luxury real estate that had made her rich on her own merits before meeting Ade, and a beauty that required constant maintenance, and got it without apology. She was intelligent. Ade would not have been interested in her if she weren't, and she had the particular quality of very self-assured people that her presence in any room subtly reorganized that room's hierarchy in her favor. She kissed him on the cheek, looked at him. "You arrived earlier than expected," she said, and it was half welcome and half a gentle accusation, one of those that can be denied if the other names it. "Yes," Ade said. "How's your mom?" "Better. There's a new girl in the service who's had an interesting effect on her." Kemi raised her eyebrows with an expression that was curiosity, but which Ade knew well. It was the curiosity of someone already forming an opinion. "What kind of effect?" "She makes her laugh. They danced together the day I arrived." Danced. It wasn't a question, it was a repetition. The kind people make when they hear something that needs time to process. "Chief, Mrs. Olufunke." "Yes." Kemi smiled. It was a genuine smile. Ade knew it, but at the edges of that smile was something he would learn to identify better in the following days. "How curious," she said. The introduction happened the next day at breakfast. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke had breakfast on the glassed-in terrace when there was sun, and that September Saturday, Lagos awoke with an improbable clarity that made the garden almost unreal. Ifeoma was pushing the wheelchair towards the table when Kemi appeared at the terrace door in her ivory silk robe and a cup of black coffee. Ade arrived behind her. "Ifeoma," he said, "this is Miss Kemi Adeyemi." Ifeoma nodded with a brief inclination of her head. "Good morning, ma'am." Kemi looked at her with the rapid thoroughness with which people accustomed to evaluating properties evaluate everything else. Uniform, posture, manner of holding the wheelchair, the naturalness with which Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, upon sitting at the table, extended her left hand towards Ifeoma before Ifeoma offered it. That last detail was what imperceptibly tensed something in Kemi's expression. "Nice to meet you," she said with the perfect cordiality of someone who feels no pleasure at all. "Have you been with the family long?" 3 weeks, ma'am." "So little. And already integrated." The word integrated floated in the terrace air like a stone skipping on water. It seemed harmless until one noticed how much weight it carried underneath. Ifeoma met Kemi's gaze for the exact amount of time that was correct. "I do my job, ma'am," she said. Then she poured Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's orange juice, arranged the bent straw in the glass, and retreated to the kitchen with the same economy of movement as always. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke followed Ifeoma's exit with her eyes, then looked at Kemi. Her expression was not legible to most people, but Ade, who was beginning to learn his mother's new language, noticed something in it. His mother had not extended her hand towards Kemi. Kemi's 3 days in the mansion were a silent demonstration of an art she had perfected over years. Territorial occupation without declaration of war. She did nothing that could be directly pointed out. She wasn't rude to Ifeoma. She didn't give orders that contradicted the doctor's, didn't interfere with established routines, but she did small, constant things that Ifeoma registered with the precision of someone who has learned to read the weather before the storm arrives. She would arrive in the living room when Ifeoma was with Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, and settle into the armchair by the window with her phone, not integrating, but not leaving, turning her presence into an unrequested supervision. She asked questions about the elderly woman's medications with a tone of genuine interest that was actually a verification of whether Ifeoma knew or didn't know the answers. She commented to Ade, in a sufficiently audible voice, details about elder care she had read in some article, always with the implicit conclusion that the current approach could be improved. And she casually asked Mr. Obinna, with the studied nonchalance of someone not investigating anything, about the history of previous service staff. Ifeoma did not respond to any of these things. She did her job, cared for Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, arrived punctually and left on time. And on Monday, when Kemi's silver Porsche exited through the wrought iron gate towards her apartment in Lekki, Ifeoma felt the air in the mansion change consistency. Lighter. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke noticed it too. That afternoon she hummed by herself without anyone playing music. Barely a sound. A single phrase from a song Ifeoma didn't identify as she looked at the garden. It was the first time the elderly woman had produced music on her own initiative since the stroke. Ifeoma reported it to Mr. Obina for the daily log. Mr. Obina transmitted it to Ade. Ade read the report that night on his phone after a 2-hour video call with the Abuja team. He read it twice. Then he put it away and looked out the window at the mango tree in the garden under the September moon and thought about things he wasn't used to thinking about because they weren't useful for anything concrete. The following Wednesday, the crisis arrived. It was unannounced. Real crises never are. Aid had a 9 a.m. meeting with the architects of the Port Harcourt project. Ifeoma arrived for the morning shift and found Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's right arm stiffer than usual. It was something that happened some days, the doctor had observed. A kind of tide that rose and fell without apparent logic. The exercise routine would have to be gentler that day. At 11 a.m., while Ifeoma was helping Chief, Mrs. Olufunke with exercises in the first-floor therapy room, Ade entered. He didn't knock. It wasn't his custom in his own house, but he paused upon seeing them and didn't interrupt. He stood in the doorway, observing how Ifeoma guided his mother's arm in slow, circular movements, counting in a low voice, adjusting pressure when the elderly woman frowned slightly. 4 more, Ifeoma would say. Almost there, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke. 1, like this, perfect. 2, very good. 3, well done. 4, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke let her arm drop with the visible relief of someone finishing an effort. Ifeoma supported it before it fell uncontrollably, lowered it gently, and then did something Aid didn't expect. She gave a small clap, just 2 claps, but with the conviction of someone applauding something truly deserving of applause. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke looked at her and smiled. Ade cleared his throat from the doorway. Both women turned. "I need to speak with you," he told Ifeoma, "when you're done." 5 minutes, sir. Aid spent those 5 minutes in the corridor with his hands in his trouser pockets, looking at the painting of his grandfather that hung opposite the therapy room door. It was an oil portrait from the 1950s. Chief Femi Bakare, with a period mustache, dark eyes, and the expression of someone who had built something with his hands and wanted the world to know it. Aid wondered, not for the first time, if his grandfather had been happy. Then Ifeoma came out into the corridor, and the question settled on its own. "My mother hummed by herself on Monday," Ade said without preamble. "Yes, sir, I reported it. I read it." Pause. "Is that normal in the recovery process?" "I don't know if normal, but it's good. It means the music is no longer just a response to an external stimulus. It means she already has it inside and produces it herself." Ade looked at her with that evaluating expression Ifeoma had learned not to take as a threat or an invitation. "Where did you learn that?" "With my grandmother. You told me that before. I want to know more." Ifeoma considered how much she wanted to say. It was an equation she constantly calculated in that house. How much to show, how much to keep, what information was useful, and what was simply hers and no one else's. "My grandmother had a stroke when I was 12, she said. "She lost her English. She only had Igbo left, which was her first language, but no one else in the village spoke it well. So I learned to communicate with her in other ways. Gestures, tones, the music she liked, the smells that put her in a good or bad mood. I learned that when someone loses a way to communicate, they don't lose the desire to communicate. They just need someone to learn the new language." Ade said nothing for a moment. "Did your grandmother recover?" he finally asked. "Not in the medical sense, but she lived 10 more years and was happy." Pause. "That's also recovery, sir. It depends on how one defines the word." The corridor fell silent. From inside the therapy room came the soft sound of Chief, Mrs. Olufunke settling into her wheelchair. "I wanted to tell you something," Aid said in a voice that had dropped half a tone without him seeming to notice. "Dr. Emeka Eze spoke with the agency administration. We are requesting that your contract be direct with the family starting next month. Better salary, full benefits, if you agree." Ifeoma looked at him. She didn't respond immediately because she had learned that quick answers seem rehearsed. "Agreed," she said. "Good." Aid adjusted his jacket with that automatic gesture he made when closing a deal. "Mr. Obina will give you the details. He turned halfway. Chief Bakare. He stopped. Thank you, Ifeoma said, not just for the contract. Ade didn't turn around, but his back, inside the well-tailored jacket, showed an almost imperceptible change, like when someone breathes differently. Do your job well, he said and kept walking. It was Sade who told Kemi, not in person, by message, a brief text. With the economy of someone who knows that written words leave a trace, and one must be careful how much trace is left, they hired the girl from Enugu direct. Family contract. The chief spoke with her in the corridor for a long time today. Kemi read the message in her Lekki office between one call and the next. She read it once, saved it, continued with her meeting. But that night, when she spoke with Ade on the phone and he casually mentioned Ifeoma's new contract, Kemi responded with the studied lightness of someone who pretends not to care about something she cares about deeply. Oh, that's good. If it works for your mom. Brief pause. Though, darling, don't you think there's something a little, I don't know, intense in how she gets involved with her for someone who's only been there 3 weeks? Intense how? I don't know. I don't want to judge without knowing her well. I'm just saying that sometimes people build very quick bonds with vulnerable people, and it's not always for the right reasons. Aid didn't respond immediately. Are you saying something specific or just suggesting? Just observing, my love. You know more about this than I do. The call ended shortly after with the usual cordiality. Aid was left with the phone in his hand, looking at the blank screen. He thought about the corridor, about Ifeoma's voice saying, "That's also recovery, sir. It depends on how one defines the word." He thought about Kemi. He thought about the difference between observing someone with genuine curiosity and observing someone looking for a flaw. It wasn't an easy difference to define, but it existed. On Thursday, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, did something she hadn't done since before the stroke. She pointed at Ifeoma's phone with the index finger of her left hand, that finger she used to indicate what she wanted when words wouldn't come, and then pointed towards the living room stereo. Ifeoma understood. Do you want music, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke? The elderly woman nodded. A brief, almost imperceptible movement, but it was a nod. Intentional, communicated. Which one do you want, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke? She couldn't answer that with words, but her eyes moved towards the window, and then towards Ifeoma with an expression Ifeoma interpreted after 3 weeks of living together. You know, Ifeoma played Joromi, and Chief, Mrs. Olufunke closed her eyes, not with tiredness, but with the concentrated pleasure of someone receiving exactly what she needed. Ifeoma observed that from the corner of the room and felt something she didn't quite know how to name. It wasn't pride exactly. It was more like the satisfaction of someone who has been searching for the right key for a long time and finally hears the sound of the lock giving way. That afternoon, when she finished her shift, she found a handwritten note on cream-colored paper, in small, neat print she didn't recognize, at the staff quarters door. Miss Okoro, I would appreciate it if daily reports also included the topics of conversation you initiate with my mother to maintain a complete picture of the stimuli she receives. A. Bakare. Ifeoma read the note twice, folded it carefully, and put it in her apron pocket. A. Bakare, not Ade, not the chief, just an initial and a surname, like a corporate signature. But it was the first time anyone in that mansion had left her a handwritten note. Ifeoma walked into the garden through the back corridor. The loaded mango tree swayed its branches in the afternoon wind. It smelled of rain that hadn't yet arrived. She stood for a moment by the mango tree, looking towards the second-floor window where Aid's study was. The light was on, a shadow crossed the glass and disappeared. Ifeoma put her hands in her apron pockets and went to her room to write the day's report in the tight, regular handwriting of someone who learned to write late and made it neat. She would include the topics of conversation, and also, though not requested, she would note that Chief, Mrs. Olufunke had asked for music for the first time on her own initiative, because that also deserved to be on the map. There are houses that keep secrets in their walls, as mud brick keeps moisture, unintentionally, effortlessly, with the simple accumulation of years and silences that no one bothered to name. The Bakare mansion was one of those houses, and Ifeoma, who had grown up in a mud brick house and knew perfectly what kind of silence that was made of, felt it from the first day, although it took her 3 more weeks to find the crack from where it emerged. It was a Tuesday. Ade had left early for the Victoria Island offices and wouldn't return until night. Kemi wasn't there. She hadn't appeared at the mansion for 10 days, though she called Aid every night with the regularity of a clock one hasn't asked for but doesn't dare to remove. The duty staff was as always, Mama Nike in the kitchen, Mr. Obina supervising the cleaning of the East Wing rooms, Said somewhere in the house, doing what she did when no one was directly watching her. Ifeoma was with Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, in the library. The mansion's library was Ifeoma's favorite room, though she would never have said it aloud, because no one had asked her, and besides, it wasn't her place to have opinions about it. It was a high-ceilinged room with dark wood shelves from floor to ceiling, elegantly worn Persian rug, 2 green leather armchairs that had seen better decades and were, for that very reason, the most comfortable in the house. It smelled of old paper and something floral Ifeoma couldn't identify. Perhaps it was simply the smell of years settling on things. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, wanted to be there Tuesday. She didn't ask with words. She pointed to the library door when Ifeoma asked her where she wanted to spend the morning. With that index finger gesture Ifeoma already knew as well as her own name. So there they were, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke by the window, with the October sun entering diagonally across her lap and Ifeoma in the corner, arranging books that someone, probably the cleaning staff, without clear instructions, had returned to the shelves in the wrong order. It was while rearranging the books that she found it. It wasn't a book. It was a thin, manila envelope, with no visible sender, tucked between 2 volumes of Nigerian history, on the second shelf from the top. It must have fallen from somewhere, and someone had put it there without checking. Or perhaps someone had hidden it there with the logic that no one looks for documents among books no one reads. Ifeoma didn't open it immediately. She held it for a moment, looking at it. It had a name written on the front, not Ifeoma, a name she didn't recognize. Chiniere, in a round, old-fashioned script, thick nib pen, the kind of handwriting taught in schools 60 years ago. She turned it over, written with the same pen, but in smaller, shakier handwriting, as if written later or in a different mood. For when the time comes, Ifeoma looked up at Chief, Mrs. Olufunke. The elderly woman was looking at the garden. She hadn't turned her head. She couldn't have seen the envelope where it was. Ifeoma should have put the envelope back among the books and continued with her work. She didn't. She opened it. Inside were 2 things, a photograph and a handwritten letter on 3 pages of yellowish-white paper. The photograph showed a young woman, early 20s, dark hair, floral dress, which was the fashion of the 60s or 70s, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. The woman looked at the baby with that particular expression human beings have when they have just produced a love they didn't know they could feel. On the back of the photograph, in the same round script as the envelope, Olufunke and the child, May 1971. The child? Ifeoma looked at the photograph for a time she couldn't measure. Then she read the letter. The letter was written in the first person in the formal, somewhat florid English, of someone who had learned to write when writing well was still a sign of character. It had no date at the heading, but the paper and ink indicated years, perhaps decades. It began, Chiniere, if you are reading this, it is because I have decided it is time for someone else to carry this burden, or because my hour has come and the burden remains ownerless. In any case, what I write here is true, though it has cost me a lifetime not to say it. Ifeoma had to read it twice to fully understand it, not because the handwriting was difficult, but because the content required time to settle in her mind, as water settles in an irregular container, filling the shallower spaces first and then the deeper ones. The letter was from a woman named Mama Ada, and in it was told a story 54 years old. In 1971, Olufunke Bakare, the same Olufunke who was now by the window, with the sun in her lap and her eyes fixed on the garden, had given birth to a girl. She was not the daughter of Chief Femi Bakare, whom she was already married to, and who at that time spent long periods in northern Nigeria supervising his businesses. She was the daughter of another man, whose name the letter did not explicitly mention, only calling him he, with the discretion of someone protecting someone even from the grave or from silence. The girl had been born healthy. She had lived 3 weeks in Mama Ada's house, who was Olufunke's trusted traditional midwife, and also her closest childhood friend. In those 3 weeks, Olufunke had visited her every day, fed her, sung to her, looked at her with that expression from the photograph, and then at the end of the 3rd week, she had made the decision. It was not a decision of the heart, Mama Ada wrote. It was a decision of circumstances. Olufunke had Adekunle, who was then 4 years old, and she had Femi, who knew nothing, and there would be no way to tell him without destroying everything. Olufunke told me, Mama Ada, she deserves a full life, not the half I can give her. So we found a family, good people from Port Harcourt, who couldn't have children, and the girl left. The letter continued describing how Olufunke had lived with that secret for decades, how Mama Ada had kept it with her, how at some point in the 1990s they had tried to look for the child, now an adult woman, but adoptions of that era did not have the records they do today, and the trail had been lost between local government areas and archives that time had erased, or bureaucracy had turned into walls without doors. And at the end, on the last page, in the shakiest handwriting of all, I don't know if this letter arrives in time for anything. Perhaps there is nothing left to repair, but Olufunke always knew it was a debt she owed the world. And people who owe the world don't rest well, even if they pretend. If someone reads this, know that Olufunke was not a bad mother. She was a frightened mother, which is something completely different, though the result is similar. Mama Ada, Surulere, 2003. Ifeoma folded the 3 pages with the care. One folds something that could break if one isn't careful, even if the paper isn't fragile. It was the fragility of the content that demanded that care. She put the letter and the photograph back into the manila envelope. She held it in her hands for a long moment. She looked at Chief, Mrs. Olufunke. The elderly woman was still by the window, but something had changed in her posture, a very slight stiffness in her shoulders, a way of tilting her head that Ifeoma hadn't seen that morning. And then she realized. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, knew she had found the envelope. She couldn't have known it otherwise. She hadn't turned, hadn't seen anything, but she knew. Ifeoma approached slowly. She sat on the green leather armchair next to the wheelchair, beside the elderly woman, as she always did, not in front of her, but alongside. Both looking in the same direction, she placed the envelope on Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's lap. The elderly woman lowered her eyes to it. Her left fingers touched it, barely, as one touches something that hurts and one needs to verify that it still hurts. I didn't read it all. Ifeoma lied with the same calm with which she would tell the truth. I saw it was yours and I put it away. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke looked at her. In her eyes was something Ifeoma hadn't seen there before. A question, not one of the everyday questions if she wanted music, if she preferred the garden or the terrace, if her right arm was stiff. Today, it was a deeper question. One of those people keep for so long that they no longer know if they are still questions or if they have become something else. It's okay, Ifeoma said. Whatever it is, it's okay. She didn't know exactly why she said that. It wasn't a promise she could keep. She didn't know what was in the envelope. Well, she did know. She had read every word, but she had decided that it was not her business and that the decision to tell or not to tell was not hers. What was hers was to be there. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke pressed the envelope against her chest with her left arm. She closed her eyes. And Ifeoma remained still by her side, not speaking, not playing music, doing nothing but being present while the elderly woman silently carried the weight of 54 years that no one else in that house knew existed. The next 48 hours were Ifeoma's most difficult since she had arrived at the mansion. Not because of the work. The work remained the same. Routines, exercises, music, reports for Mr. Obinna. But because of the burden of knowing something she wasn't supposed to know and having to decide what to do with it. The options were clear, and none were perfect. She could say nothing, continue as if she hadn't found the envelope. It was the simplest option, and the one with the fewest immediate consequences for her. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's secret was not her secret, and if the elderly woman had survived 54 years with it, she would survive a few more. She could tell Adi. That was the option that worried her most. Not because she doubted that Aid had the right to know he had a sister somewhere in the world, but because she knew, with the clarity of someone who has seen enough wealthy houses from the inside, that information in those spaces does not move cleanly. It moves with consequences. It moves with reactions. It moves with people losing the balance they had and not always recovering it better than before. What if knowing destroyed something in Aid that was still whole? And what if not knowing continued to destroy something in Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, that could still be saved? The third night after finding the envelope, Ifeoma wrote in her notebook. She had a black-bound one where she wrote things that were not for anyone else. The question that kept turning in her head: when does silence protect? And when does silence harm? She didn't write the answer because she didn't have it. It was Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, who decided for her. On Thursday morning, when Ifeoma arrived in the room, the elderly woman was awake before she arrived, which was unusual, and had the manila envelope on her lap. She had taken it from somewhere. She kept it. Ifeoma didn't know where, and was holding it with her left arm pressed against her chest, as she had done 2 days earlier. But this time, when Ifeoma entered, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke looked at her and extended the envelope towards her. It wasn't a gesture of surrender, it was a gesture of pointing. Like when one points at something, one wants someone else to see. "Do you want me to keep it?" Ifeoma asked. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke shook her head. A small movement, but clear. "Do you want me to give it to someone?" The elderly woman didn't respond immediately. Her eyes moved towards the room door, then upwards the ceiling, or perhaps the floor above where Aid's study was. Ifeoma felt something tighten in her chest. "To your son?" Chief, Mrs. Olufunke closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her expression was that of someone who had just made a very difficult decision and was too tired to keep postponing the cost. She nodded. It was the clearest nod Ifeoma had seen her give in all the time she had been there. It wasn't the usual millimeter of movement. It was a complete, deliberate inclination of the head, with the weight of a resolution that had been waiting decades for that moment. Ifeoma took the envelope carefully. "Okay," she said. "I'll tell him you want to speak with him, in your way." Chief, Mrs. Olufunke nodded again, and then, with her left arm that still obeyed, sought Ifeoma's hand and squeezed it. It wasn't the gentle squeeze of every day. It was something more urgent, more honest. Ifeoma squeezed back. "Don't worry," she said. Although she knew that was exactly what Chief, Mrs. Olufunke would do, "You didn't carry this burden alone all this time to keep carrying it alone. Now you're not alone." The words came out before Ifeoma finished deciding whether to say them. But hearing them in the silence of the room, with the October sun entering through the window and the mango tree in the garden laden with fruit no one had picked, they seemed true, sufficiently true. That afternoon, when Ade arrived from the Victoria Island offices with his jacket over his arm and the 3 forehead wrinkles indicating a difficult day, Ifeoma intercepted him in the first-floor corridor. It was the first time she had sought him out. It had always been the other way around. Ade stopped. He looked at her with that expression of someone immediately recalibrating the situation. "What happened?" he said. "It wasn't a question. Your mother needs to see you," Ifeoma said. "Tonight, if you can. She has something she wants to tell you, in her own way." "Is she physically okay?" "Yes, she's fine. But there's something she's been waiting a long time to tell you, and I think she doesn't want to wait anymore." Ade looked at her for a long moment. "Do you know what it is?" Ifeoma didn't respond immediately. She held Ade's gaze with the same calm with which she had held everything else in that house. "It's your mother's," she finally said. "Let her tell you." Ade nodded. He left his jacket on the corridor armchair the first time Ifeoma had seen him not immediately attend to his belongings, and walked towards Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's room without saying more. Ifeoma remained in the corridor. Outside, the October sky over Lagos had that color between orange and violet that lasts exactly 10 minutes before night falls and makes the entire city seem, for a brief moment and without warning, completely different from what it is the rest of the time. Ifeoma looked at it from the corridor window. She thought of her grandmother, of the Igbo no one else understood, of the words that remain unsaid, not because one wants to keep them, but because life builds walls around them, brick by brick, year by year, until one day there is no longer a door until someone finds it. The manila envelope was now on the other side of that door in Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's hands, waiting for the exact moment her son would enter the room and sit beside her, and the elderly woman would extend her arm with the weight of 54 years of silence made of paper and ink. Ifeoma wondered how that house would change after this night. She wondered if it would change for the better. She wondered if she would remain in that house after everything that was about to move, finished, moving. She had no answers to any of the 3 questions, but she stayed by the window, looking at that 10-minute sky until the orange left and the violet left, and night came with its clean, promise-free darkness. And then she went to her room, turned on the small bedside lamp, and opened the black-bound notebook. She wrote, "Today, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke decided to let go of something she carried alone all her life. I hope she can breathe easier afterward. I hope we all can." She closed the notebook and turned off the light. There are people who plan with the same coolness with which they breathe, without visible effort, without the slightest external sign that something is being calculated beneath. Kemi Adeyemi was one of those people, and the difference between her and others was not intelligence, but patience. Kemi could wait. She could wait weeks, months, if necessary, building each piece in place with the precision of someone who knows exactly what image she wants to see at the end of the puzzle. She had waited 4 years for Ade to propose. She could wait as long as necessary for a housekeeper from Enugu State to disappear from that house. What accelerated the plan was not impatience, but information. It was Sade who called her on a Thursday night with a voice that tried to be casual and didn't quite succeed. "Miss Kemi, I don't know if this interests you, but I thought you should know." "Tell me, Sade." Chief Ade was with his mother for almost 2 hours on Wednesday night. The door closed. No one entered. Mr. Obinna says that when the chief left, his face was different, and Chief, Mrs. Olufunke woke up the next day with swollen eyes from crying, but calmer than ever, as if they had resolved something. Kemi listened with the stillness of someone categorizing a new variable in an equation that was already quite advanced. And the girl, Ifeoma? That same afternoon she spoke with the chief first in the corridor. It was she who sent him to the room. "I saw that with my own eyes." Pause. "Do you know what happened?" "No, ma'am, but what I do know is that something happened. Something between the chief and his mother that girl knew about beforehand." Kemi hung up with her usual courtesy. She remained for a moment looking at the ceiling of her Lekki apartment, with the phone on her chest, and her eyes fixed on the spot where the designer chandelier projected a perfect circle of light onto the white plaster. Aid had mentioned the conversation with his mother the next day by phone. He had told her they had talked about important things, that his mother had revealed something from the past, that he needed time to process it. He hadn't told her what it was. That was new. Aid processed everything aloud with her. It was part of the dynamic they had built in 4 years. He brought the problems. She offered perspective. He made decisions that incorporated that perspective without explicitly acknowledging it. It was a system that worked, that made her necessary. Now there was something he was processing in silence, and the housekeeper knew what it was. Kemi needed no more data to decide it was time to act. The opportunity arrived the following Monday, with the naturalness with which opportunities arrive when one has been building them without it seeming so. Ade traveled to Abuja on Sunday afternoon, 2 days of meetings with the Northern Project team, and asked Kemi to stop by the mansion on Monday to review some documents he had left in his study. It was a minor, routine errand, the kind Aid occasionally gave her because she knew the house well, and he trusted she could move around it unsupervised. Kemi arrived at 11 a.m. Mr. Obinna received her with his usual protocol. He offered her coffee, pointed to the second-floor study, and retired to his duties. Kemi went up to the study, found the documents, reviewed them. They were lease agreements, nothing urgent, and left them on the desk. Then she went down to the first floor, and instead of heading to the exit, she went towards the wing where the staff quarters were. There was no one in the back corridor. The staff were dispersed throughout the house in their morning duties. Ifeoma was with Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, on the terrace. Kemi had verified this from the study window before going down. Ifeoma's room had no lock. It was an unwritten rule in such houses. Staff rooms didn't lock because masters needed to know they could enter whenever they wanted. A rule Ifeoma probably hadn't questioned because she had nothing to hide. Kemi pushed the door open. The room was small and neat, bed made with military precision. The wooden chair with the next day's uniform already ironed and hung. A shelf with 3 books, 2 on geriatric nursing and 1 of stories that looked well, read, and a small framed photo of a dark-skinned elderly woman smiling in front of a mud brick house, the black-bound notebook beside the bedside lamp. Kemi didn't open the notebook, not because she cared about Ifeoma's privacy, but because she didn't need what was in there. What she needed, she had brought herself. She took a small pearl brooch from her bag, a discreet piece of jewelry, the kind that gets lost without drama, that no one remembers exactly where it was, and placed it under Ifeoma's mattress, pushed towards the center where it wouldn't be visible at first glance, but where it would unfailingly appear if someone lifted the mattress with the intention of searching. Then she opened the first drawer of the bedside table, where Ifeoma kept a small notebook with important phone numbers and some cash. And there, mixed among the Naira notes, she left a small diamond earring, a single earring, as if the other had been lost. The brooch and the earring belonged to Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, minor jewels the elderly woman had accumulated for decades and which Mr. Obinna vaguely inventoried each year, without the discipline necessary to immediately detect 2 missing pieces. But if someone looked closely, they wouldn't be in Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's jewelry box. Kemi closed the drawer, left the room, closed the door with the same gentleness with which she had opened it. She walked down the back corridor towards the kitchen, where Mama Nike looked up from her pots with a neutral expression. "Mama Nike, could you prepare me a cup of coffee before I leave? Chief Aid's documents took longer than I thought." "Of course, ma'am." Kemi settled on the kitchen counter stool, crossed her legs, and waited for her coffee with the absolute tranquility of someone who has done nothing wrong. 4 days passed. 4 days in which Ifeoma did her job with the same punctuality as always, in which Chief, Mrs. Olufunke woke up each morning with her arm less stiff and her eyes more present, in which Ade returned from Abuja and spoke with Ifeoma twice in the corridor about his mother's progress. Brief, concrete conversations, with that tone he had found between the professional and something neither of them would have been able to name precisely. On Thursday afternoon, Mr. Obina knocked on Ifeoma's room door. She opened it. Mr. Obina had an expression Ifeoma hadn't seen on him before. Uncomfortable, serious, with something that could be shame or the face of someone who has to do something they don't want to do and knows it's unfair but has no way to avoid it. Ifeoma, he said. Chief Ade needs to speak with you in the study now. Ifeoma looked at him. Did something happen to Chief, Mrs. Olufunke? No, madam is fine. Then, Mr. Obina didn't answer. He opened the door wider with a gesture and waited. Ifeoma followed protocol, took off her apron, hung it up, went up the wooden staircase to the second floor. The study door was open. Ade stood by the desk, not seated, which was already a sign that this was not an ordinary conversation. Kemi sat in the armchair by the window, legs crossed, with an expression of concern that would have convinced almost anyone. Almost. Close the door, Ade said. Ifeoma closed the door, stood in front of the desk. She didn't look for a chair. No one offered her one. Mr. Obina did an inventory of my mother's jewelry this morning, Ade said. His voice was that of difficult meetings, flat, without temperature, not pointing fingers yet. 2 pieces are missing, a pearl brooch and a diamond earring. Ifeoma said nothing. Do you know anything about this? No, sir. Ade nodded slightly, as if that was what he expected to hear. Mr. Obina checked the staff quarters this afternoon. Pause. Ifeoma felt something stir inside her. Not fear exactly. It was more like the recognition of a situation she had seen before in different versions. The accusation that arrives already constructed, where what one says changes nothing because the pieces are already where someone wanted them to be. The jewelry was in your room, Ade said. No, Ifeoma said. We found them under the mattress and in the bedside table drawer. Someone put them there. That's what someone who took them would also say. Yes, Ifeoma said. I know, but I didn't take them. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Ade looked at her with that evaluating expression Ifeoma already knew, but which now had something different, something that resembled the pain of someone who wants to believe something and cannot allow himself to. Kemi intervened from the armchair with the soft voice of someone who doesn't want to intervene, but feels compelled by circumstances. Ade, perhaps there was a misunderstanding. Sometimes people take things without fully thinking about. There was no misunderstanding, Ifeoma said, looking directly at Kemi for the first time in that room. I didn't take anything. Kemi met her gaze with a serenity that Ifeoma found more eloquent than any argument. Look, Ade said, and in his voice was something that wasn't coldness, but the visible effort of someone trying to be fair in a situation where justice requires more information than he has. I cannot ignore what we found. Regardless of how those jewels got there, I need to ask you to. He stopped. To leave, Ifeoma said. Ade didn't respond. What he did was worse. He lowered his gaze to the desk. A second, just a second, but Ifeoma saw it. It's okay, she said. Her voice didn't tremble. She had decided, in the interval of 3 breaths, since entering that study, that she would not cry, would not plead, would not perform the role of unjustly accused innocence, because she had learned very well that such performances only convince those who already want to be convinced, and Adekunle Bakare at that moment could not afford to want to be convinced. I have things in my room, she said. I'll take 20 minutes. Mr. Obina will prepare your severance, Ade said with the voice of someone repeating a phrase that cost him every syllable. Ifeoma nodded. She turned towards the door. Ifeoma. She stopped. She didn't turn. What you did with my mother, Ade began. It was my job, she said, and opened the door and left. She went down the wooden staircase, crossed the back corridor, entered her room, sat on the bed for exactly 1 minute, hands in her lap, back straight, looking at the photo of her grandmother on the shelf. Then she stood up and began to fold her clothes. She had few. The navy canvas bag fit everything with room to spare. The 2 geriatric nursing books, the storybook, the photo of her grandmother she unwrapped from a piece of cloth and rewrapped carefully, the black-bound notebook, the documents in the plastic folder. 20 minutes. When she came out through the back corridor with the bag on her shoulder, Mama Nike was at the kitchen door. Her arms were crossed and her eyes were shining. And Ifeoma knew she already knew what had happened. because in those houses news traveled faster than the will of those who wanted to contain it. "My dear," Mama Nike said, in the hoarse voice of someone holding back several things at once. "I'm fine, Mama Nike," Ifeoma said. "You're not fine. No one who leaves like this is fine. I'll be fine then." Mama Nike opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "I know you didn't take anything." Ifeoma nodded. She said no more. She walked towards the back door that led to the garden, and from there to the side access of the private estate, which was where staff entered and exited. The mango tree was still laden. No one had picked the fruit. It was falling to the ground on its own. She noticed it in passing. She stepped out onto the street. 3 things happened in the Bakare mansion in the hours following Ifeoma's departure, and all 3 happened in the exact order in which things usually happen when something that was wrong begins to show the seams of its lie. The first, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke waited for Ifeoma all afternoon. Mr. Obinna noticed it at 4 p.m. when he went to bring her afternoon tea and found the elderly woman with her eyes fixed on the room door, her left hand on the armrest, her fingers drumming with the impatience of someone waiting for someone she knows is coming. When Mr. Obinna explained, with the economy of someone who doesn't know how to soften the unsoftenable, that Ifeoma was not coming back, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke looked at him for a long moment, and then let her hand drop from the armrest and turned her wheelchair towards the window and did not look at anyone else for the rest of the day. The second, Sade, who had been Kemi's source, began to feel the specific weight of what she had done. It wasn't guilt exactly. Sade didn't consider herself guilty of having transmitted information that was true, although she had deliberately omitted the part where she herself had let Kemi into Ifeoma's room without telling anyone. But there was something about the image of the navy canvas bag leaving through the back door that stuck in her memory with the insistence of things one cannot simply ignore. The third and most important, Adekunle Bakare didn't sleep. He stayed in his study until 2 a.m. with the communicating vessels of reason and something more difficult to name turned on. And he mentally reviewed every conversation, every report, every moment in that corridor or in that room where Ifeoma had said or done something that didn't fit the image of someone capable of stealing jewels from an elderly woman who had given her hand, and the more he reviewed it, the less everything fit. At 2:15 a.m., he went down to his mother's room. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke was awake, with the hallway light filtering through the slightly ajar door. Maid could see that his mother was looking at him from the darkness of the room, with an expression he had only learned to read with some precision in the last few weeks. What he saw on his mother's face was not sadness. It was something closer to disappointment, not exactly in him, but in the situation, in a world that remains unjust in ways that don't change no matter how much money one has or how many marble floors the house has. Ade sat on the armchair next to the wheelchair. His mother's hand sought his in the darkness, and for the first time in many hours, Adekunle Bakare was no longer completely sure of what he had done. Large houses have memory, not in the poetic sense that those who write about them like, but in the most concrete and almost mechanical sense. Security cameras, access logs, digital systems that no one reviews because there has never been a reason to review them. All that invisible infrastructure that exists to protect the assets of those who can afford it and which, when someone has reasons to search, holds exactly what they need to find. Adekunle Bakare had spent 20 years making business decisions based on data. It was, in fact, the characteristic his partners cited most frequently when describing his work style. He didn't act on intuition, he acted on information. He asked for the numbers, asked for the records, asked for the recordings when they existed. He built the complete map before moving a single piece. He had made the decision about Ifeoma without doing any of that. That was what kept him from sleeping, not the possibility that she was innocent. Although that possibility existed and grew every hour with the insistence of true things, but the fact that he, Adekunle Bakare, who wouldn't sign a N10 million contract without reading every clause, had fired a person based on objects found in her room and on Kemi's silent presence in that armchair by the window. At 7 a.m. on Friday, he called Chief Aurelio Rivas, the head of the mansion's security system. "I need the recordings from the interior cameras from last Monday, all day, especially the staff wing and the second floor." There was a brief pause on the other side. "Is there a problem, Chief Ade?" "I don't know yet," Ade said. "That's why I need the recordings." While Ade waited for the video files, the Bakare mansion was undergoing its own process of silent collapse. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke hadn't eaten well in 2 days. It wasn't a conscious hunger strike. The elderly woman had no way to articulate that kind of deliberate protest. It was something closer to what had happened before Ifeoma arrived. The appetite that withdraws, the gaze that turns inward, the body that begins to reflect what the mind cannot say with words. Sade attended to her with impeccable efficiency. She arrived punctually, executed the routine correctly, spoke with the appropriate tone, but Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, didn't look at her. It wasn't hostility. The elderly woman had no energy for hostility. It was simply the absence of that recognition she had begun to give Ifeoma from the fourth day. That small signal of, "I see you and I'm glad you're here," which required no words to convey. Dr. Emeka Eze arrived on Friday afternoon and left the room with an expression Mr. Obina read with precision. "How bad is it?" he asked in the corridor. "She's not in immediate danger," the doctor said with the careful economy of partial bad news. "But there's a clear regression. The level of response we had 2 weeks ago." He took off his glasses and cleaned them. A gesture Mr. Obina had learned to identify as the equivalent of a dramatic pause. There are brains that respond to specific people in ways that neurology doesn't fully explain. Chief, Mrs. Olufunkes responded to Ifeoma. Removing that stimulus has consequences. Can it be reversed? The doctor put his glasses back on. It all depends on how quickly the situation is corrected. Mr. Obina escorted him out and then stood for a moment in the mansion's foyer, looking at the portrait of Chief Femi Bakare in the main corridor, thinking about the navy canvas bag he had seen leave through the back door 2 days earlier, and how he had been in that house for 12 years and had never seen anyone care for Chief, Mrs. Olufunke with the genuine, not professional, but genuine dedication that girl from Enugu State did. Then he went to Ade's study and knocked on the door. Ade had been in front of the screens for 4 hours when Mr. Obina entered. The video files were extensive, 16 cameras, 12 hours, and Ade had divided them by zones and times with the same methodology with which he analyzed financial reports. He had started with the staff wing cameras, first floor, time slot between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. on Monday. He knew what he was looking for. He didn't know if he would find it. He found it on the back corridor camera at 11:16 a.m. The image was in color, high definition, with the characteristic angle of corner cameras that capture the entire corridor. At 11:16, a figure crossed that corridor towards the staff wing. The figure walked with a calm, knowing stride, like someone who knew exactly where they were going and felt no need to disguise it, because no one expected there to be anything to disguise. It was Kemi. Aid froze the image, magnified it. There was no doubt. The ivory silk robe Kemi wore in the mornings when she was at the mansion. Her hair pulled back with the carry clip she'd had for years. The particular way she carried her bag on her left shoulder. He checked the angle of the interior camera in the staff hallway. Kemi stopped in front of the second door in the corridor, pushed it, entered. Ifeoma's room. Aid looked at the time on the recording. 11:16. He checked where Ifeoma was in the house at that time. The glassed-in terrace camera. Ifeoma with Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, giving her the morning sun. 11:15, 11:30, not moving from there. Kemi was in Ifeoma's room for 4 minutes and 8 seconds. When she left, the bag on her left shoulder had exactly the same shape as when she entered. What she had left inside was small enough not to change the bag's profile. Ade remained staring at the frozen screen at the moment. Kemi left the room with her calm, knowing stride. Mr. Obina knocked on the door at that precise moment. "Chief Ade, Dr. Emeka Eze says that, Madam." "I know," Ade said without taking his eyes off the screen. "Mr. Obina, get me Ifeoma Okoro's number." Brief silence. "Sir, her phone number should be in the hiring records. I need to call her now." Mr. Obina took exactly the time it took to understand what that meant. Then he said in a voice in which Aid could hear something akin to relief, "Yes, sir, right away." Ifeoma's phone rang at 4 p.m. She was in Auntie Nkechi's room in Umuaka, Enugu State, where she had arrived by bus the previous night after spending her first night in Lagos in a lodging house in Fadeyi, where she had stayed when she first arrived in the capital years ago. She had no plan yet. She had the canvas bag, the black-bound notebook, the folder with her documents, and 3 days' wages that Mr. Obina had given her in severance, plus an additional week Ade had added without explanation. Auntie Nkechi hadn't asked her anything. She had opened the door, let her in, placed a plate of akara and moi moi in front of her, and sat silently to eat with her. That was Auntie Nkechi. She didn't ask, but she didn't leave anyone alone either. Her grandmother was in the living room, on her usual armchair. with her good arm resting on the pillow Ifeoma had embroidered with yellow flowers when she was 15. Seeing her granddaughter enter, the grandmother looked at her for a long moment and then extended her arm. Ifeoma knelt beside the armchair and rested her head on her grandmother's lap, as she had when she was 7 and had had a bad day at school. The grandmother stroked her hair. She said nothing because she had no words in the language Ifeoma fully understood, but her hands said enough. That night, Ifeoma had slept 10 hours straight, the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who has been carrying something very heavy and has finally let it go. When the phone rang on Friday afternoon, she looked at it before answering. Lagos number. She didn't recognize it. She answered anyway. Ifeoma Okoro. She recognized the voice immediately, the voice of corporate meetings, but with something different now, something she hadn't heard before in that voice. Yes, she said. This is Adekunle Bakare. Ifeoma didn't respond. She waited. I reviewed the security camera recordings, Aid said. Brief pause. A pause of the kind people make when they are about to say something difficult, and they know it's difficult, and they say it anyway. I saw what happened on Monday. Who entered your room and when? Silence. I understand what happened, Ade continued, and what I did was a mistake, a grave mistake, and I know it. Ifeoma listened. My mother hasn't eaten well in 2 days, he said, and in that sentence was something that was not just medical information. Dr. Emeka Eze says there's a regression, that you were a stimulus she needed, and that removing it has consequences. I know, Ifeoma said without resentment, without the satisfaction of being right and wanting the other to feel it. Just the direct answer of someone who knows the subject being discussed well. I want to ask you to return. Silence. As an agency employee, with a direct contract as we had offered you, with the conditions you want to set, and with an apology that I know doesn't cover what happened, but which I owe you, and I give it to you. Ifeoma looked at her grandmother from the living room door. The elderly woman had her eyes closed, the tranquil breathing of an afternoon nap, her arm on the yellow flower pillow. What will happen with Miss Kemi? Ifeoma asked. There was a pause on the other side that Ifeoma correctly interpreted. Aid hadn't expected that question, or he had expected it but didn't have the answer fully resolved yet. That is a matter I will resolve, he finally said. You have my word. I'm not asking for details, Ifeoma said. I just need to know if I'm returning to a house where the situation that made me leave is still the same. It will not be the same, Aid said. Another pause. Longer this time. I need a day, Ifeoma said. Whatever you need, I'll call you tomorrow. Okay. Aid was about to hang up when Ifeoma added, without having planned it, how is Chief, Mrs. Olufunke right now? A very brief pause. Looking out the window, Aid said. No music. Ifeoma closed her eyes for a moment. I'll call you tomorrow, she repeated and hung up. She remained seated on the edge of Auntie Nkechi's bed for a time she couldn't measure. Outside, the sounds of her childhood village entered through the window without glass. With the familiarity of things one has heard all one's life, and that the body recognizes before the mind. Chief Fortino's rooster, Mrs. Catalina's dog, the sound of the water tanker that passed at the same time forever, Igbo mixed with English, which was the natural language of those dirt streets and sun-faded facades. She thought of Chief, Mrs. Olufunke looking out the window without music. She thought of the mango tree laden with fruit falling to the ground on its own. She thought of what her grandmother had taught her without intending to, that caring for someone is not just being present when it's comfortable, it's also coming back when it's difficult. It's also deciding that the bond that was built is worth more than the pride of leaving and not returning. She thought of Aid saying, what I did was a grave mistake and I know it, with that voice that was not the voice of corporate meetings, but the other one, the one that sometimes appeared in the corridors and wooden staircases when no one else was watching. She went out to the patio. Her grandmother was awake now, sitting in the straw chair by the mud brick wall, the afternoon sun falling on her hands. She looked up when Ifeoma approached. Ifeoma sat on the ground by her feet, as she did as a child. The grandmother placed her hand on her head. Ifeoma said nothing in English. She said in the mixed, half-understood Igbo she had learned over years of listening, "What do I do, Neoma?" The grandmother looked at her for a long moment, then pointed towards the horizon, where the dirt road leaving the village disappeared among the palm trees and eventually reached the highway that led back to the big world. It was not an order. It was an observation. Ifeoma understood it anyway. The next morning, Saturday, when the sun was still low over the hills of the Central Valleys, Ifeoma packed the navy canvas bag with the same efficiency with which she had unpacked it 2 days earlier. She kissed her grandmother on the forehead, hugged Auntie Nkechi, who asked nothing, and put a container of moi moi in her bag for the journey. She went out to the street. The first bus to Enugu capital left at 7 a.m. From there, she would take the long-distance one to Lagos. She would arrive in the afternoon. She took out her phone and called the number she had saved the night before. Aid answered on the second ring. "I'm coming back," Ifeoma said. "I'll arrive this afternoon." A brief pause. "Thank you," Aid said. It was the first time Adekunle Bakare had thanked her for anything directly, without mediating it through work or circumstances. It was a single word, but it carried the weight of someone who doesn't say it often, and therefore values it when he does. "Take care of her in the meantime," Ifeoma said. "Play her music, whatever. Don't let her be in silence." "What song?" Ifeoma thought for a moment. "Jerome," she said. "Victor Uwaifo's version." "Agreed." They hung up. Ifeoma walked towards the bus stop with the canvas bag on her shoulder and Auntie Nkechi's moi moi in her hand along the dirt road among the palm trees under the sun that was beginning to rise over the hills of her childhood. She didn't know exactly what awaited her upon her return. She knew that Kemi was still part of Ade's life, or at least had been until yesterday, and that had implications that were still unresolved. She knew that Saad was still in that house with her resentment intact or perhaps increased. She knew that Chief, Mrs. Olufunka, was fragile in ways that could not always be protected, but she also knew, with the specific certainty of someone who has learned to distinguish what matters from what only seems important. There was an elderly woman in a wheelchair by a window looking at a mango tree laden with fruit, waiting for someone to arrive and play music and tell her without words that the world still had things worth living for. That was enough reason to get on the bus. For now, it was more than enough. Adekunle Bakare was not one to postpone difficult conversations. He was, in fact, quite the opposite. Someone who preferred the clean, direct pain of uncomfortable truths to the slow, cumulative pain of things left to rot beneath the surface. He had learned this at 32, when his father died without having resolved 3 family conflicts that had dragged on for decades. And Ade had to inherit not only the business group, but also the knots Chief Femi had never had the courage to untie. Since then, Ade had a simple rule. Conversations that hurt must be had before the pain becomes permanent. He called Kemi that same night. It was not a long call. Conversations Ade needed to have with absolute clarity never were. "I need you to come to the mansion tomorrow," he said. "I have something to show you." Kemi responded with her usual confident warmth. "Of course, darling. Is something wrong?" "Tomorrow." He hung up. Kemi arrived at 11 a.m. on Saturday, with her usual punctuality and a navy blue dress, Ade recognized as the one she wore when she wanted to project seriousness without losing elegance. It was a detail that in other circumstances would have gone unnoticed. Today he noticed it with the clarity of someone who already knows what he's going to find and is calibrating every additional signal with new attention. Mr. Obinna received her in the foyer. Ade came down from the study before she reached the first step. "Come up," he said simply. In the study, Aid had prepared the 2 screens. On the left, the video file of the back corridor loaded at the exact minute. On the right, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's jewelry inventory with the 2 pieces marked in red. Kemi entered the study with her usual stride. She paused upon seeing the screens. Something in her posture shifted, an almost imperceptible adjustment, the kind the body makes when it receives unexpected information and needs a second to reorient itself. Just 1 second. Then she was Kemi again. "What is this?" she asked with the open expression of someone who has nothing to hide. "Sit down," Aid said. "Aid, what?" "Sit down, please." She sat, crossed her legs, placed her bag on her knees with that automatic gesture of someone who needs something in her hands. Ade pressed play. The video ran in silence. 4 minutes and 8 seconds of the Bakare mansion's back corridor. The figure in the ivory silk robe, walking with a knowing stride towards Ifeoma's room. The door opening, the door closing. 4 minutes and 8 seconds. The door opening again, the figure leaving with the bag exactly as it was when she entered. Ade paused the video. The study fell silent. Kemi looked at the screen. Her expression hadn't changed dramatically. She hadn't paled. She hadn't put a hand to her mouth. She hadn't made any of the gestures people make when they are surprised by something they didn't expect. What had changed was something more subtle. The quality of the silence around her, the way the air seemed to have become denser in the square meter where she was sitting. "Kemi," Aid said. She looked at him, and Aid saw at that moment something he had never seen in that woman's eyes in 4 years. Calculation, not the calculation of someone who thinks quickly and well, which was something he had admired in her from the beginning, but the calculation of someone deciding in real time which version of events had the highest probability of working. She chose the truth, not because she was honest by nature, but because she calculated that the truth at that specific moment was the only card she had left. Yes, she said, a single syllable, but with the weight of everything it admitted. Aid said nothing. It wasn't to harm her, Kemi continued in the voice of someone building an argument as she spoke. It was to protect you, us. That girl was. Stop, Ade said. Kemi stopped. Don't explain why. I don't need that, Kemi. What I need, he continued with a calm that was not coldness, but something closer to the exhaustion of someone who has spent hours reaching a conclusion he didn't want to, and has now reached it, is for you to understand what you did, not what you intended to do or why. What you did, Kemi looked at him. You placed 2 jewels in the room of a woman who had done nothing, a woman who came from Enugu State with a canvas bag and 3 weeks of honest work, who achieved what no doctor or therapist had achieved with my mother in a year and a half. And you drove her out of this house with an accusation you knew was false. She was taking away. What? Ade's voice rose half a tone, the only visible sign of something simmering beneath. What was she taking away? Influence, access, my attention. Kemi didn't respond. Kemi, pause. My mother is 81 years old and had a stroke that took away half her capabilities. We found someone who made her laugh, who made her dance, who after 18 months of silence managed to make my mother want to be in the world again. And you destroyed it because you felt that girl was a threat to you. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. The study fell silent again. Kemi looked at her hands on her bag, her perfectly painted nails, her rings, the gold bracelet that had been a gift from Aid on their 3rd anniversary. What's going to happen? She finally asked. Ifeoma returns this afternoon. Kemi looked up, and this, Ade pointed to the screens. I will hand it over to whoever is appropriate if anything like this happens again, not as a threat, but as information about how I operate. And us? The silence that followed lasted longer than the previous ones. Ade walked to the window, looked at the garden. The mango tree was still laden. No one had picked the fruit. He would have to tell the gardener. 4 years, he said without turning around. 4 years, and I had never seen you do anything I couldn't, with effort, understand from your logic. This I don't understand, not from any angle that doesn't leave me feeling responsible for not having seen what you were capable of when something bothered you. Ade, we are all capable of. No. Not everyone puts stolen jewels under an innocent person's mattress. He turned, looked at her. That's not a moment of weakness, Kemi. It's character, and it's been yours for 4 years. And I didn't see it, or I didn't want to see it, which is probably the same thing. Kemi opened her mouth, closed it. For the first time in the 4 years Ade had known her, Kemi Adeyemi found nothing to say. I need you to leave, he said. And I ask that what happened here does not leave these 4 walls, not for me, for Ifeoma, who doesn't deserve her name circulating in any context she didn't choose. Kemi stood up, picked up her bag, smoothed her navy blue dress with that automatic gesture she had, which Aid now saw with completely different eyes. She walked towards the door, stopped in the doorway. I made a mistake, she said with her back to him. I know, but I also know that what I felt wasn't irrational. There was something between you and that girl that you haven't named yet, Aid, and I didn't invent that. She left. Ade heard her heels descend the marble staircase. He heard Mr. Obina's voice in the foyer. Brief, formal. He heard the main door close. He stood by the study window for a long time, looking at the mango tree in the garden. He thought about what Kemi had said on her way out. He thought about the corridors, about the wooden staircases, about the brief conversations with changing temperature that he hadn't known how to name. He thought about a voice telling him, "That's also recovery, sir. It depends on how one defines the word." He hadn't named anything yet, but he didn't deny it either. Ifeoma arrived at the Bakare mansion at 5:40 p.m. She didn't arrive by taxi. It was an expense she didn't need to make when the bus and Keke Napep dropped her 10 minutes walk away. She arrived with the navy canvas bag on her shoulder, Auntie Nkechi's moi moi already eaten on the way, and her usual stride, direct, without unnecessary haste, but without stopping. She rang the side access bell. Mr. Obina opened before it finished ringing. "Welcome," he said with a warmth that was not his usual register, and which Ifeoma received without comment. She crossed the garden. The mango tree was still laden. They still hadn't picked the fruit. "Mr. Obina," she said in passing. "Yes, we need to pick the mangoes. They're falling on their own." "Yes," Mr. Obina said. "I'll tell the gardener." Ifeoma nodded and continued towards the back door. Ade was waiting for her in the first-floor corridor, not in the study, not in the living room, But in the corridor, standing, hands in his trouser pockets, and without his jacket, the first time Ifeoma had seen him without a jacket in the mansion, they looked at each other. Ade opened his mouth. "We talked before," Ifeoma said. "We're fine." "We're not fine yet," he said. "But we will be." Ifeoma considered that for a moment. Then she nodded with the same brevity with which she nodded to things she found sufficiently true. "How is Chief, Mrs. Olufunke?" "Better since I played the music. Mr. Obina told her you were coming," and she responded. She raised her arm. Ifeoma didn't exactly smile, but something in her expression changed in the same way the air changes when the rain stops. "I'll go see her," she said. Ade stepped aside. Ifeoma walked down the corridor towards Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's room. She knocked softly, pushed the door. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke was by the window. The October afternoon sun entered diagonally and fell fully on her hands, on her lap, on the good half of her face. Her eyes were open and she looked towards the door with the expression of someone who has been waiting for a while, not knowing exactly how much longer she would have to wait. When she saw Ifeoma, she raised her left arm. It wasn't the small gesture of good morning. It was something wider, more urgent, more honest. The gesture of someone who has been waiting for someone with whom she has an unresolved conversation, one that needs no words. Ifeoma crossed the room, knelt beside the wheelchair, took that small hand in hers. "I'm here," she said. "I'm here, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke." The elderly woman looked at her for a long moment, then did something Ifeoma hadn't seen her do before. With the index finger of the hand Ifeoma held, she traced a slow, deliberate movement on the back of the young woman's hand. A closed circle. Ifeoma felt it. She lowered her eyes to her own hand, looked back at Chief, Mrs. Olufunke. She didn't know exactly what that circle meant, but she felt it in the place where important things are felt before one understands why they are important. "Yes," she said, although she didn't quite know what she was saying yes to. From the partially open room door, Ade observed that moment for exactly 3 seconds. Then he walked away down the corridor without a sound, his silent rubber soles on the marble, back towards the study where the Port Harcourt contracts awaited him with the indifferent patience of documents that don't know what's happening around them. But before reaching the staircase, he stopped, took out his phone, found the song, connected it to the downstairs stereo's Bluetooth. Joromi filled the corridor with Victor Uifo's voice, and the gentle weight of all the things said without being said. Ade put away his phone and went up the stairs with a different step, something he wouldn't be able to describe if someone asked him, and which, for that very reason, was probably the most real thing he had felt in that house in many years. That night, Sade asked to speak with Mr. Obina. She found him in the kitchen after Mama Nike had left, and the house was in the 10 p.m. silence, which was its usual mode. "I need to tell you something," Sade said. Mr. Obina looked at her. "Miss Kemi asked me about Ifeoma several times since she arrived, and I told her things. I didn't do anything wrong with the jewels. That wasn't me, but I gave her access. I told her when Ifeoma was on the terrace, and I didn't tell anyone that Miss Kemi had gone to the staff wing that Monday." Mr. Obina listened without interrupting. When Sade finished, the butler remained silent for a moment, looking at his cup of tea. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. Sade took a moment to respond. "Because I saw Ifeoma enter Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's room this afternoon," she finally said, "and I saw how Madam raised her arm, and I knew that what I did was wrong, even if I wasn't the one who put anything in any room." Mr. Obina nodded slowly. "Are you going to tell Chief Ade?" Sade asked. "He already knows," Mr. Obina said. "The cameras, he found what he needed to find, and I." The butler looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, with the economy of words of 12 years in that house, "That depends on how you work from now on, not on what you did, but on what you do next." Sade nodded, said no more. She got up, left the kitchen, went up to her room, and in the 10 p.m. silence, the Bakare mansion was inhabited by its usual sounds, the hum of the ventilation system, the occasional creak of wood in the old wing, the almost imperceptible sound of Chief, Mrs. Olufunke breathing peacefully in her room, and from somewhere on the first floor, as if someone had forgotten to turn it off, or had consciously decided not to, the fine, persistent thread of Joromi floating in the house's air like something that had come to stay. November arrived in Lagos with its deceptive temperatures. Sunny days that promised heat, and evenings that suddenly dropped to 12 degrees Celsius when the sun disappeared behind the clouds. It was the month Ade had always associated with the year's most intense work. Project closures, budgets for the next fiscal year, Year-end meetings that accumulated with the density of someone who knows December is useless for anything urgent. This November was different. Different because in the mornings, before checking emails and financial reports, Ade went down to his mother's room. Not always for long, sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes less, but he went down. He sat on the green leather armchair in the library if the day was good, and Chief, Mrs. Olufunke wanted to be there, or by the room window if she preferred the garden view. He brought his coffee, didn't try to initiate conversations his mother couldn't sustain. He simply was present. He had learned that from Ifeoma, without her explicitly teaching him. He had learned it by observing, and observing Ifeoma work with his mother had become, in recent weeks, something Ade did with a frequency he hadn't planned and hadn't yet analyzed with the attention he usually gave to things that changed his routines. The week of November 10th, Ade traveled to Port Harcourt for 3 days for the Northern Project closure. It was the first trip since Ifeoma's return to the mansion, and also the first time that on the mental list of things he would leave in order before leaving, Ifeoma's name appeared before that of the financial team. He asked Mr. Obina to inform him if there was any change in Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's condition. And then, on the private jet to Port Harcourt, looking at the lights of the Delta from the window, he wondered since when he wanted to receive reports on his mother's well-being with that level of detail. Always should have been the answer. But it hadn't been. And the difference between the always that should have been and the now that was had, if one was honest, a name and a pair of dark brown eyes with eyebrows that no one had overplucked. The conversation that changed everything's direction happened on Friday, November 21st, in the mansion's garden at 6 p.m. Ifeoma was picking the last mangoes from the mango tree. She had insisted so much with Mr. Obina that finally the gardener had brought the ladder, but the ladder was too tall for the tree's central fork, and there were fruits on the lower branches that were easier to pick by hand. So Ifeoma picked them with the naturalness of someone who doesn't expect anyone else to do what she can do, and put them in the plastic bucket she had taken from the kitchen, without asking anyone's permission. Ade arrived in the garden through the side door of the study. He had finished a 2-hour call with the Abuja investors and needed some fresh air. He saw her from behind with the bucket on the ground, and both hands busy with a lower branch of the mango tree. Her uniform with the white apron already somewhat stained with mango juice on her right forearm. She was humming something. Ade took a moment to identify it. It was Sweet Mother, the same song from the first day, the one of their encounter. He said nothing immediately. Ifeoma heard him arrive. She turned, saw it was him, and didn't change what she was doing. She finished detaching the mango she held in her hands and put it in the bucket before turning completely. "Sir," she said. "Continue," he said. "I'm not interrupting," but he stayed there, leaning against the garden wall with his arms crossed, looking at the mango tree and the bucket, and the way Ifeoma evaluated the next branch with the practical gaze of someone who has picked fruit before and knows how to do it without wasted movements. They stayed like that for a while. Ade without speaking, Ifeoma picking mangoes. The humming faded by itself, as the presence of silence between them became more evident than the sound. "When was the last time you were in Enugu State?" Ade suddenly asked. Ifeoma looked at him from the branch she was evaluating. 3 weeks ago. When She didn't finish the sentence. It wasn't necessary. "Is your grandmother well?" "Yes. Auntie Nkechi takes good care of her. I go often when I can. Every 2 or 3 months." Ade nodded, looked at the garden. The November sun was setting fast, and the garden was already in that amber light of 6 p.m. that made everything seem quieter and more permanent than it was. "I've never been to Enugu State," he said. Ifeoma looked at him with an expression Ade couldn't quite read. "Never? You fly over it but never stay?" "It's different to stay," Ifeoma said. "What's it like?" Ifeoma put the bucket on the ground and considered the question with the seriousness she gave to things that mattered to her. "It's like suddenly slowing down," she said. "Like when you're driving on the highway and suddenly you enter a village and there are potholes and speed bumps. At first, it's frustrating. Then you realize that the bumps exist because there are things that deserve you to go slowly." Ade looked at her. "Like what?" "Like the market on a Sunday. Like seeing someone weave a mat in the compound. Like the egusi soup that takes 3 days to make and tastes of those 3 complete days." Ade didn't respond immediately. "My mother never went to Enugu State either," he finally said. "She traveled to Europe 4 times. To the United States more than that. To Japan once to accompany my father on a business trip, but never to Enugu State." Ifeoma looked at him. "Why are you telling me that?" "I don't know," Ade said. And it was true. He didn't know exactly. Perhaps because I'm thinking about the things one arrives late for. The garden fell silent, except for the wind moving the now almost empty mango tree. You don't always arrive late, Ifeoma said. Sometimes you just arrive when you arrive, which isn't the moment you would have chosen, but it's the only one there is. Ade looked at her with that evaluating expression Ifeoma knew well, but which at that moment had something added. Something that wasn't exactly evaluation, but closer to the contemplation of someone looking at a map and discovering a territory he hadn't marked. I'm going, he said, to Enugu State. Yes, next month there's a development project in the central areas that has been on my desk for 2 years without me setting foot there. It's time. Ifeoma nodded. She said nothing about Umuaka. She said nothing about her grandmother or the mud brick house with the cement floor that arrived 3 years late. She said nothing about the dirt road among the palm trees that she walked with her canvas bag on her shoulder exactly a month ago. But Ade saw something in her expression that he couldn't immediately name and that he saved, without yet knowing for what, in the place where he kept things that mattered. Ade arrived in Enugu State on Tuesday, December 9th. He didn't arrive alone. He brought his project director, Ifeanyi Obasi, and 2 architects from the development team. It was a business trip with a full agenda, meetings with the local government, a visit to the land in the central areas, lunch with the regional development director. But on the flight, while Ifeanyi reviewed the project documents and the architects dozed in the private jet's rear seats, Ade took out his phone and wrote to Ifeoma. Arrived in Enugu State today. Anything I should see off agenda? The answer took 10 minutes. Ifeoma didn't always have her phone on her during her shift. The Ogbeat main market on Sundays. Mama Kata Zegusi soup in the 20th November market. And if you have time, drive towards Umuaka. There's a view from the hill you won't find on any agenda. Ade read the message twice, then wrote, Is there anyone in Umuaka who can show me that view? The answer took longer this time. I'm not there, sir, but if you ever come back, I'll introduce you to my grandmother, though she'll speak Igbo, and you won't understand anything. Ade stared at his phone screen for a moment. Then he wrote, I learn fast. There was no response after that, but he didn't expect one. Tuesday's agenda was intense and productive, as Ade's agendas always were. Meeting with the local government at 10 a.m., working lunch, land visit in the afternoon. The project had real potential. The area had a combination of basic infrastructure and landscape that could be developed without destroying what made it valuable. If one had the intelligence not to repeat the mistakes made in other similar developments. Ade took notes, asked questions, walked the land with the architects under the December sun in Enugu State, which was different from the Lagos sun cleaner, more direct, without the layer of pollution that diffused everything in the capital. At 6 p.m., when Ifeanyi and the architects went to the hotel to review the next day's materials, Ade asked the chauffeur to take him to Umuaka. The chauffeur looked at him in the rearview mirror. Umuaka, sir. Do you have a meeting there? No, Ade said. I want to see a view from a hill. The chauffeur asked no more questions. Umuaka was exactly as Ifeoma had described it, and also exactly what he hadn't been able to imagine. They arrived when the sun was already low, near 7 p.m., and the village had that particular end-of-day light that makes the faded colors of the facades seem precisely right, as if they had reached that point of wear through a long and deliberate process. The main road was dirt, the secondary streets, too. There were children on the corner of a provision store, a woman sweeping the front of her house with a palm broom, a dog sleeping in the middle of the street without any urgency. Ade got out of the car. The air smelled of earth, of something that could be local spices, of the specific blend of the central valleys that had no equivalent in Lagos or any of the places Ade had been. He walked towards the hill visible to the east of the village, following the path the chauffeur, who turned out to be from the area, indicated with the naturalness of someone giving directions to a place he had known all his life. The walk to the hill was 20 minutes. Ade did it in silence with his Oxford shoes, which were not suitable for dirt, but which performed better than he expected. Around him, the blue palm trees lined the path with that almost perfect geometry of plants that have been cultivated in the same soil for centuries. He reached the summit when the sky was in the same 1-0 minute state that Ifeoma had described, without knowing it, that between orange and violet, that makes the world seem for a brief moment completely different. From above, the valley stretched in all directions with its farmlands and villages and dirt roads. And in the background, far in the distance, the dark smudge of Enugu city, its lights beginning to switch on one by one. Ade stood there for a time he didn't measure. He thought of his mother, of the manila envelope and Mama Ada's letter, and the photograph of Olufunke and the child. May 1000, 971. He thought of the conversation they had had that October night in Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's room, with the door closed, and the words his mother couldn't say but communicated in other ways, with her eyes, with the hand that squeezed his, with the specific weight of a secret that had been carried in solitude for too long. He thought that somewhere in the world, perhaps in Port Harcourt, perhaps in another state, perhaps no longer in Nigeria, there was a 4-year-old woman who didn't know that her biological mother was an elderly woman in a wheelchair in Ikoyi, who had spent half her life searching for her, without knowing how to find her. He thought about that with the calm of someone who has already stopped resisting difficult information and has begun to ask himself what to do with it. And he thought about Ifeoma, not for the first time, but with a clarity that previous times had lacked. He thought that this girl had arrived at his house with a canvas bag, and 3 weeks later had achieved what he had not achieved in 18 months of absence and money and doctors and therapies. He thought that she had done it not with technique or training, but with something Ade had spent a lot of time cultivating in himself in business and almost no time in any other area. Genuine attention, real presence, interest that is not performance but habit. He thought that Kemi was right about only one thing in everything she had said when leaving the study that Saturday. There was something he had not yet named. The sky finished changing from orange to violet to black in that precise and indifferent order. The lights of the valley villages came on fully. The air dropped another 2 degrees. Ade took out his phone, took a photo of the valley, the lights, the horizon, the sky still with the last vestige of color. He sent it to Ifeoma, without text. The response arrived 3 minutes later, only 2 words. "You're late," Ade smiled. It was the first time, the first genuine time, without protocol or justifying circumstances, that he had smiled in many months, perhaps years. He didn't know for sure because he had stopped keeping that kind of tally a long time ago. He wrote, "I arrived when I arrived, which is all there is." He paused for a moment, then added, "Thanks for the view." He put away his phone, went down the hill along the path among the palm trees, with complete darkness now, and his phone's flashlight lighting the dirt road. And when he reached the car, and the chauffeur looked at him in the rearview mirror with the implicit question of where to, Ade said, "To the hotel." And then, after a moment, "Hey, do you know the Okoro family from the village?" The chauffeur thought, "Mama Neoma's people." "Yes, of course. Everyone knows them. The grandmother is Ma. I don't remember the name, but they've been here all their lives. They are good people." The chauffeur looked at him in the rearview mirror with the particular expression of someone receiving a simple question and suspecting it's not so simple. "The best," he finally said. "Why?" Ade looked out the window at the dirt road that disappeared among the palm trees under the black December sky. "No reason," he said. "Curiosity." The car moved along the road with its headlights cutting through the darkness of the valley, and Ade remained looking out with the expression of someone in the slow, irreversible process of understanding something that has been true for a long time before one recognizes it. He returned to Lagos on Thursday afternoon. The mansion greeted him with its usual silence, which was different from the previous silence, more inhabited, more alive, with the background music that Miss Obinna had adopted as part of the daily protocol, since Dr. Emeka Eze had certified its effect on Chief, Mrs. Olufunke. That afternoon, a high-life classic floated from the living room stereo, with its rhythmic cadence, and specifically Nigerian melancholy. Ade took his luggage upstairs, came down without his jacket, crossed the first-floor corridor. Ifeoma was in the library with Chief, Mrs. Olufunke. The door was ajar. Ade didn't enter. From the doorway, he saw his mother with the book of Nigerian photographs Ifeoma had taken from a shelf. Images of markets, mountains, colonial cities, coastlines. Ifeoma pointed to the photos and spoke, and Chief, Mrs. Olufunke looked with that concentrated attention she only had when something truly interested her. At that moment, Ifeoma pointed to a photograph. Ade couldn't see which photo it was from the corridor, but Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, upon seeing it, raised her left arm and touched the page with her fingertip. The same gesture with which she touched things she recognized, that she wanted, that she felt were her own. Ade observed that for a moment. Then he quietly moved away from the doorway. He went to his study, sat at his desk, opened his email. He had 42 unread messages since Tuesday. He opened the first, but before reading it, he took out his phone and found the photograph he had sent to Ifeoma from the hill of Umuaka. The valley with the lights, the horizon, the sky between orange and violet. He looked at it for a moment, then saved it as his wallpaper and began to read his email. December arrived at the Bakare mansion with its Christmas lights, which Mr. Obina placed with his usual precision, and with something more that hadn't been there in previous years. Sound. Not the sound of staff or official visits, but the soft, constant sound of a house that had truly become inhabited again. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, had breakfast on the terrace every morning with the sun. Ade came down before 8 a.m., and Ifeoma arrived punctually, with her ironed uniform and her phone charged with the music. The elderly woman requested each day with the gesture of her index finger pointing at the stereo. It was a new balance, still fragile, as all things that have just found their form are fragile, but real. On December 18th, while Ifeoma was arranging the book of Nigerian photographs on the library shelf, Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, called her not with words, but with the deep sound of a single note that Ifeoma had learned to distinguish from all others. The note that meant, "Come, I have something to tell you." She approached. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke looked at her for a long moment. Then, with her left hand, she took Ifeoma's, and with a slowness that was pure effort, she articulated not perfectly, with the right half of her mouth partially obeying, but she articulated two syllables Ifeoma didn't expect. "Thank you." Ifeoma said nothing, squeezed the elderly woman's hand with both of hers, and stayed there in silence. While outside, the Lagos December did what it knows how to do. Clean, cold, blue sky, the mango tree now without fruit, but with its leaves shining under the winter sun. It was at that exact moment that Ade entered the library. He paused upon seeing them. Chief, Mrs. Olufunke looked up at her son and then did something neither of them had seen before. With her left hand, without letting go of Ifeoma, she gestured for Ade to come closer, the same gesture mothers make to their children when they want them near, when they want to have both of them in the same place at the same time. Ade crossed the library, knelt beside the wheelchair on the other side of his mother, and Chief, Mrs. Olufunke, with a smile that was the half she had left, but which was enough to fill the entire room, placed her left hand on the joined hands of Ade and Ifeoma. The three hands together, no one spoke. There was nothing to say that image didn't say better. 3 days later, on December 21st, Ade called Ifeoma to the study. She went up the wooden staircase, knocked, entered. Ade stood by the desk with an envelope in his hand, not the manila envelope of Chief, Mrs. Olufunke's secret. A new white one. "Sit," he said. She sat. Ade placed the envelope in front of her. "It's a new contract," he said, "with different conditions than the previous ones. Read it when you want, but there's something I need to tell you before you read it." Ifeoma looked at him. "What my mother did 3 days ago," Ade said with the voice that was no longer that of corporate meetings, but the other one, the one that appeared in the corridors and gardens and hills of Enugu State, "was not just gratitude towards you. It was also an instruction. For me." Silence. She hasn't been able to say what she wants to say for years, but I learned to read her, and what she was telling me is that some things shouldn't be left for later. Ifeoma didn't respond. "I'm not offering you the contract just as an employee," Ade said. "I'm asking you to stay in this house as part of this family, with the time that requires and the space you want." The study fell silent. Outside, the December garden shone under the winter sun. Ifeoma looked at the white envelope. Then she looked at Ade. "Do you know what you're saying?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "For the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I'm saying." Ifeoma took the envelope. She held it in her hands for a moment. "I'm going to tell you something too," she said. "I came to this house with a canvas bag and no plan to stay longer than the job lasted. But there are houses you don't choose, that choose you, and this one chose me in ways I still don't fully understand." Ade looked at her without saying anything. "I'll read the contract," Ifeoma said, "and I'll respond tomorrow." She stood up, reached the door. "Ifeoma." She turned. "My mother said, 'Thank you' this morning," with both syllables complete. Ifeoma looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said. "I was there," and left. She responded the next day with the 7 a.m. sun entering through the staff quarters window and the mango tree in the garden shining outside, fruitless, but with a presence that was already part of the landscape Ifeoma recognized as her own. She went up to the study, knocked, entered, placed the envelope on the desk in front of Ade. "Yes," she said, "just that." A single syllable with the weight of everything that came next. Ade nodded without drama, with the calm of someone receiving an expected answer that nevertheless changes everything. "There's one more thing," Ifeoma said. "The child from your mother's envelope, the one given up for adoption in 1971, we need to find her." Ade looked at her. "I know," he said. Your mother, she knows it too, and she's been carrying that alone for 54 years. She doesn't have to anymore. I know, he repeated. They looked at each other in the silence of the study, with the December sun entering through the window and the garden outside, and the entire house around them, with its memory of walls, and its secrets now unburdened, and its mango tree that would bear fruit again in the spring. And in that silence, which was no longer the empty silence of before, but the silence full of things that are about to begin, neither of them felt the need to say more, because some stories don't end, they just finally find the place where they truly begin.